Okay, I am going to explain in this short video how I'm going to um, explain the introduction to the process of signal transduction. So, okay, so usually when I teach this topic, I start with this daily life examples. Um, so usually when I'm teaching in the online settings, like if we have a synchronous classroom and we are using the university's learning management system, so I'm going to first of all tell my students that, okay, if I just make an announcement that instead of teaching today, I'm going to have a surprise exam. So then I'm going to ask students, how are you going to feel about this news? There is no teaching today, but there is a surprise exam. So then I will ask them to use the chat feature, and I'm going to ask them to write their reaction to this news, how they're going to feel. And I know from the experience, I know they're going to write down that, oh my God, this news is horrifying news. My heart rate is going to increase. Somebody will say my pulse rate is going to increase. Somebody will say, oh my God, I'm going to stress out. I'm going to have pain in my tummy and all that. Somebody say I'm going to have a nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, many things students are going to say. Then I'm going to ask them, okay, I'm just giving you a news. How does this news makes all the different organs in your body to be affected? So what is going on? So then I'm going to explain to them that it is basically because of this chemical called adrenal or epinephrine. So this is basically a hormone. Okay. So when I'm announcing this news, so basically this hormone is being secreted, and this hormone is binding on its receptors. Okay. And it is causing the cells to communicate with each other, and this process is called signal transduction. Okay, so basically what this process of signal transduction is, or we call it cell signaling, and how it is making the different organs in your body to be affected by this single news, because of this chemical adrenal, and this signal or this hormone, it goes and binds to its receptor. And what happens after that, this receptor is a protein, and because of the binding of this signal, there is a change in the shape of the protein, and that leads to a cascade of events inside the cell. Okay, it leads to a cascade of events inside the cell, and those events are in the form of activation of many proteins inside the cell. And because of that, the cells respond, and that cellular response can be in different forms. It can be either in the activation of some enzyme, or it can be expression of some gene, or it can be maybe change in some cytoskeleton protein. And as a result of that, there is either the change in the motility, there is some movement in the cell, there's a change in the motility of the cell, or there is a change in the shape of the cell. So this is the process of cellular communication or cell signaling, or we call it signal transduction. So that is why this news of the surprise exam makes you feel like that, because your adrenal glands, they are secreting this hormone, and this hormone is going and binding on its receptors, and these receptors shape is getting changed, and it is leading to many cascade of events inside the cell, and as a result of that, many proteins are getting activated and your cells are responding. So this is the process called signal transduction or cell signaling, or we can say our cells are communicating with each other. That is why, because of this news, different organs in your body are getting affected. And I also show them this picture, which is like a little funny thing. It's kind of an analogy. So you can see this is an animal which is being chased by the tiger, and you can see how horrified this animal looks like. How horrified this animal is looking. The reason is this tiger is chasing this. So similarly, this deer is like a student, and this tiger is like an exam. So the exams are always chasing the students, and students always feel stressed out whenever there is a exam. So this is just an analogy. And then the second example I would give the students is wound healing. So basically, I'm going to tell them, you have seen many times that sometimes our skin get cut, right? So after that, my question here, what happens after that? So again, we're going to use the chat feature, and I'm going to ask them, what happens after that? So people are going to write, students are going to write down, okay, when there is a cut in the skin, first of all, there's a bleeding, then there's a clotting, and then after a few days, you can see the skin has all become normal here. Then my question is, how is that all happening? How the skin in this area where there was a cut has become all normal? And then again, discussion, students are going to say it's because of cell division. Okay, my next question. Okay, definitely cells are dividing here, and that's why the skin is becoming normal here. But who is telling these cells that they need to divide? Okay, then I'm going to explain the process. So I can use a whiteboard here and I can explain them. Okay, so in the cell, in the skin where there's a cut, definitely there is first of all bleeding, and then there is the clotting of the blood. And how does the clotting of blood takes place? It is because of the recruitment of the platelets, right? So first of all, let me make a cell. So in the skin cell, we have some cells called fibroblast cells, okay? And these fibroblast cells, they have receptors on them. Okay, they have some receptors on them, and I'm going to make some shape of the receptor. And when there is a bleeding, the blood flows. After that, there's a clotting. And how does the clotting takes place? Because of the recruitment of the blood cells called platelets. And these platelets, they secrete one growth factor called PDGF. This is called platelet-derived growth factor. Platelet-derived growth factor. And these receptors, they are called platelet-derived growth factor receptors. So these receptors, they're protein, and especially this PDGFR, this is a kinase. Okay, this is a kinase. Kinases are enzymes. Okay. So what happens is this growth factor also has a shape. It has a complementary shape to this receptor. It goes and binds here. Okay, so this is this growth factor, which is a signal in this case. This signal, which is in the form of a growth factor, which is platelet-derived growth factor, comes and binds on this receptor, and this receptor is PDGFR, platelet-derived growth factor receptor, which is nothing but a tyrosine kinase. Okay. So when this signal, growth factor, binds on this receptor, it makes the change in the conformation of this receptor. And many things takes place here, which I'm not going to explain here. So basically, when the shape of this receptor changes, there can be either dimerization of these receptors, which means two receptors can come and form a dimer, or there can be clustering of these receptors. Many receptors come together and form the cluster. And as I just said, this receptor is a kinase. A process of autophosphorylation takes place in which these kinases, they phosphorylate each other. Okay, so these kinase becomes active, and as a result of that, there is a cascade of events which takes place inside the cell, and as a result of that, there is a activation of one protein. This protein activates another protein, then this protein activates another protein, and eventually there is a activation of a protein called transcription factors. And those transcription factors, suppose if this is a transcription factor, this transcription factor is going to go inside the nucleus. This is nucleus. So this transcription factor will go inside the nucleus, and it is going to give the signal to this cell. It's going to express some genes there. It is going to give the signal to the cell that you need to divide. And that's the way the process of signal, the process of cell division takes place in this area. And because of the cell division or the cell proliferation, the skin becomes normal in this area. So this is all again a process of signal transduction. So the platelets, they secrete this growth factor. The growth factor goes and binds to this receptor, and this receptor becomes, which is a kinase, it becomes active, it gets autophosphorylated, and then it leads to the activation of many other proteins, and eventually a transcription factor is going to go to the nucleus and it is going to give the signal to the cell that you need to divide. So this is signal transduction. And coming back, then eventually, once I have explained the overall process of signal transduction by some examples, I'm going to go a little bit in more detail, and I'm going to tell them about the 3 stages of the process of cell signaling, which involves, first step is reception, second is transduction, and third is response. So this is the receptor, it receives the signal. So once the receptor receives the signal, this first step is called reception. And once the receptor receives the signal, its conformation changes and it leads to a cascade of events which involves the activation of many other proteins in the cytoplasm inside the cell, and as a result of that, the cell is going to respond. The second step is transduction, and third step is response. The cell is going to respond to this signal, and that response can be again in the form of activation of some enzyme, or it can be expression of some gene, or it can be change in some cytoskeleton proteins. So this is the way I'm going to give the introduction to this topic. And of course, depending on the level of the class, whether it's an introductory class or it's a upper division class, we go into more details of all these signal transduction processes which involve G protein signaling, or the receptor tyrosine kinases, and the steroid hormone receptor signaling, many other kinds of signalings.